All right, so WNBA owners have officially left. The WNBA and players text message left on red. That's right. The players DM the owners on Instagram, and the message now says seen with no response. This is what happens when this is the definition of F around and find out. And now the players are finding out. And now it seems like they're trying to play victim and win over public perception once again. We got to break this down. Welcome to Keep the Vision. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, share the channel, hit that bell notification, and hype the video. Let's get right into things.
Seen. No response. That tiny line under a DM is what flipped the entire WNBA world upside down. One moment, the players thought negotiations were still alive, still moving, still in progress. The next, their last message to ownership just sat there, marked as seen, and that was it. The conversation was over, and nobody had the courage to say it out loud. Before going any deeper, pause for a second. If you want more breakdowns that actually dig into what's happening behind the headlines, hit like right now, drop a comment with whose side you think is winning this standoff, and tap subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. This story is changing fast, and you will want to be here when the next bombshell drops. Because this moment, this DM left on read, wasn't just a bad day in the group chat. It was the definition of play around and find out.
And hype the video. Let's get right into things. The clown show continues. The WNBA owners have had enough. Quite frankly, it's that simple. They've had enough of the back and forth. They did not even want to do a extension up to January 9th, and they stopped responding to these players more than 2 weeks ago. And Brianna Stewart made it seem like the conversation was still going on and all of this stuff. Now the players are talking about they want to negotiate in good faith. Why are they saying that? Because the owners do not feel that the players have been negotiating in good faith. Let's get into this article right here on ESPN. WNBA CBA Q&A. Nneka Ogwumike.
For months, both sides pushed, postured, and tried to control the narrative. But when ownership finally had enough, they didn't go on TV, they didn't drop a press conference, they didn't even send a long email. They just stopped talking. And in labor wars, silence is louder than any speech. How it all led here. To understand why that seen, no response hit so hard, you have to rewind about 15 months. The WNBA players opted out of their existing collective bargaining agreement back in late 2024, gambling that the explosion of attention around women's basketball had finally given them the leverage to demand a bigger piece of the pie. They were looking at record-breaking interest, packed arenas in certain markets, and a brand new media rights deal worth billions over more than a decade, and they decided this was the time to force the issue. The message was simple. If the league was about to cash in, so should the people actually on the court.
They're talking about they want to negotiate in good faith. Why are they saying that? Because the owners do not feel that the players have been negotiating in good faith. Let's get into this article right here on ESPN. WNBA CBA Q&A. Nneka Ogwumike, Nafisa Collier on standstill. Now you're about to listen to some ladies playing victim. That's what you are about to hear all throughout this. And then in this article where the interviewer asked them about what Caitlin Clark had to say about the compromise, they try to sweep it under the rug and act like it did not happen because they do not want to compromise on anything. They're not really trying to have a...
Since then, it has been nonstop negotiation. The original CBA was supposed to run through the 2025 season, but the players triggered the opt-out, pointing to low pay relative to revenue, limited revenue sharing, and a system that forced many of them overseas in the offseason just to make a living. Ownership agreed to keep talking and extended the deadline once, then again, eventually pushing the drop-dead date to January 9th, 2026. Each extension was sold publicly as more time to get a deal done. But behind the scenes, every pushback also signaled that both sides were struggling to find common ground on core questions, like how much risk the owners should carry and how much guaranteed money players could reasonably expect in a league that still isn't universally profitable.
Compromise. They try to sweep it under the rug and act like it did not happen because they do not want to compromise on anything. They're not really trying to have a season, man. They got Unrivaled. They got Project B. These are complete conflicts of interest. I don't even know how they are sitting in the leadership seats at this point. Complete conflict of interest with all the stuff they have going on. let's get right to it. It says on the eve of negotiating deadline for WNBA CBA collective bargaining agreement, WNBPA president and vice president Afisa Collier told ESPN they are proud of the union's solidarity and vowed to keep working for a transfer.
But here's the key part. 15 months later, there is still no deal. ESPN described the talks as making minimal progress, and even union leaders Nneka Ogwumike and Afisa Collier admitted that on the big issues, things are at a standstill. That alone tells you how far apart these two sides really are. When negotiators on both sides start using words like impasse and transformative but difficult, you know this isn't just about cleaning up a few small details or adjusting minor clauses. It's about two very different visions of what the WNBA should look like 10 years from now, and who should pay the price if those visions don't come true. And yet, while the public saw tweets, interviews, and optimistic soundbites, behind-the-scenes frustration was boiling. Players were talking about a transformational agreement, while the league was warning that some of the demands would push the business past what it could support.
And reasonable proposals. You guys have asked for more than double of everything that they're talking about. 30% is league, 30% revenue, not happening. $10.5 million cap, not happening. So, whatever. Ogwumike said, Fee's right. I'm proud of how professional and patient we've been. What do you mean professional? Y'all was taking shots at the WNBA owners on Instagram. That wasn't professional. What are you talking about? Y'all have been trying to win people over in public perception throughout the entire negotiation. What are you talking about? You guys have been playing victim the whole time. Like, oh man. She said the progress that we've seen are the...
On paper, both sides said they wanted the same thing, a stronger WNBA that pays its players more and keeps growing. In practice, their visions for how to get there couldn't have been more different. One side wanted to lock in higher guarantees now, trusting the growth to catch up. The other wanted to protect the downside first, and only share more once the money physically arrived, when owners chose silence. Now fast forward to the weeks leading up to that January 9th deadline. The union was publicly calling for thoughtful and reasonable proposals from the league. Players were talking about unity, about standing firm, and about not accepting a bad deal. But quietly, something else was happening. The owners just stopped responding. What used to be long back-and-forth sessions turned into shorter meetings, delayed calls, and eventually nothing at all. That silence made it clear that, in ownership's mind, the conversation had gone in circles one too many times. According to reporting, the league did not answer the union's most recent proposal at all because it wasn't significantly different from previous offers.
It's been very upsetting and disappointing. Okay, victim now. You're upset and you're disappointed. The tone of the negotiations coming from the league is very dismissive, very disrespectful, you know. They've said over and over again that the players don't understand the business, and for them to put a blanket statement like that over players who clearly we do. We are very smart, educated women. We know what we're asking for. We know that it's not too much like they're saying. So that's been very disappointing to have that be the tone of conversations when we are in such a transformational era. Like Nneka said, we're for both sides be benefiting and reaping the benefits of that.
That says a lot. From the league's perspective, they'd seen the same package dressed up in new language, but not enough real movement on the key items: revenue sharing, salary structure, and long-term costs. When one side feels like they're negotiating with a copy and paste document, their patience disappears quickly. At that point, silence becomes a message of its own. We've heard this already, and the answer is still no. Then there was the moratorium. Instead of opening free agency as normal, the WNBA and the union agreed to freeze almost all business, contracts, signings, regular offseason activity. On the surface, it sounded like talks are ongoing. Let's not rush. In reality, this freeze shoved the entire league into a strange legal limbo called a status quo phase, where the old CBA technically stays in place, but either side can now trigger a work stoppage without much warning. Teams can plan, agents can whisper, but nobody can truly move until a new framework exists.
That the CBA y'all are offering are going to put them $700 million in the hole. They're not taking that deal, so I don't know what. I don't get. I want to get to. Okay. Hold on one second. Okay, Ogwumike said I feel like there's a bit of by-the-book, antiquated approach to negotiations that is being used on the league side, and it foils drastically in comparison to what we are as a league. It said there's been a lot of talk and speculation about around the relationship between Kathy and the players. I really do
Fans see headlines about a pause. Insiders see a warning light flashing on the dashboard. Owners have the lockout card. Players have the strike card. Both are now sitting on the table. And instead of picking up the phone to reassure anyone, ownership went quiet. No counteroffers, no big public speeches, no extended deadlines. That's why that DM sitting there, marked seen, feels so cold. When a side with that much power decides to go silent, it's rarely by accident. It is a way of saying, we're willing to wait you out. We're willing to let time and pressure do the talking for us. And that changes the energy of every message the union sends from that point on. The players' public story. While owners leaned into silence, the players leaned into messaging. In an in-depth Q&A with ESPN, WNBA President Nneka Ogwumike and Vice President Nafisa Collier laid out their side of the story. They praised player solidarity, criticized the pace of negotiations, and insisted their proposals were both thoughtful and reasonable. They spoke about the sacrifices players have made, the years of underpayment they believe the league is trying to paper over with incremental raises, and their determination not to repeat the mistakes of past generations who settled too quickly. Collier was blunt. She said they knew exactly what they were asking for, and that it wasn't too much, no matter what the league claimed. She described the players as united, determined not to accept a bad deal, and simply waiting for the league to come back to the table with something that respected their value. The tone was confident, controlled, and carefully framed to paint the players as the mature, patient side in the room. Even when she mentioned disappointment, it was wrapped in language about professionalism and staying focused on the bigger picture of transforming the sport for future players, not just the current roster. Ogwumike echoed the same themes. Frustration with the lack of progress, a sense that the league's approach was by the book and outdated compared to what the modern WNBA has become, and a belief that the players clearly understood the business they're part of. She even downplayed the idea that their relationship with Commissioner Kathy Engelbert was the real problem, insisting feelings about individuals weren't the focus and could be repaired if the right deal was reached. The message there was intentional. This isn't personal, it's structural. That framing helps the union argue that they're not attacking one person. They're challenging an entire way of doing business that they believe undervalues them. On camera and in print, this was a polished narrative. Smart, educated women fighting for a fair deal, staying professional, staying patient, and trying to move a stubborn league forward. But the more the players leaned into that public framing, the more critics saw something else. An organized attempt to win the perception war while negotiations behind closed doors went nowhere. To those skeptics, each interview sounded less like a status update and more like a coordinated pressure campaign aimed at fans, media, and sponsors, hoping outside voices would force ownership to cave where private talks had stalled. If you're still here following this breakdown, it means you actually care about how these power games work. Tap that like button if you haven't yet, and tell in the comments whose messaging you think the fans will side with more. The players saying, we're united and reasonable, or the league warning about financial disaster. That one question, who the public believes, is a huge part of who wins in any labor fight, and both sides know it. The money war no one can escape. Strip away the emotion, and what's left is math. And that's where things get brutal. The union has been pushing for a new pay system that includes a meaningful share of league revenue, along with massively improved salaries, benefits, housing, and other protections. Reports and player comments have put a spotlight on their desire for a substantial revenue-sharing model, with some proposals tying player compensation directly to a fixed percentage of league income. On top of that, they're aiming for higher caps and more room for teams to pay stars what they believe the market justifies. In their eyes, if the league is about to receive far more from media and sponsors, it makes no sense for players to still be tied to old numbers that were set before this recent boom. On the other side, there is the league's proposal that leaked through recent reporting: a max salary above $1 million, an average salary above $500,000, and a minimum salary above $225,000. Plus, a form of revenue sharing, just not to the extent the union wants. That is not a small upgrade from where the WNBA was just a few years ago. It's a massive shift. For a league that once had players making low six-figure salaries at the top end and far less at the bottom, these new numbers would completely redefine what it means to be a professional in this league. Here's the conflict. League sources and sympathetic analysts say that the full package of union demands would push the WNBA into what they're describing as catastrophic financial losses over the life of the deal. That's where the big tens or hundreds of millions in losses language comes from. Owners aren't just calling the asks too high as a negotiating tactic. They're framing them as fundamentally unsustainable for a league that still relies on partners, shared NBA resources, and future growth that is not guaranteed. The fear is that if you lock in obligations based on optimistic projections, and those projections miss, you don't just tweak the budget, you risk long-term damage that might require contraction, relocation, or deep cuts somewhere else. From the player's point of view, this is the moment to go big. Interest is rising, viewership is up, stars like Caitlin Clark have brought in new eyeballs, and they believe sticking with the old pay structure would be wasting the biggest wave the league has ever had. From the owner's point of view, swinging too far too fast could sink the entire business before it ever truly stabilizes. Both sides are staring at the same numbers, but one side sees opportunity and the other sees risk. One side thinks, if not now, when? The other thinks, if we overreach now, there might not be a later to fix it. That's why this fight feels so tense. It's not just about tweaking numbers. It's about two completely different risk profiles. One side willing to risk the present for a bigger future, and the other terrified that overpromising on that future could erase everything they've built. Until they agree on how much uncertainty the league can safely carry, no spreadsheet is going to make both sides happy. Side projects and conflicts of interest. Then there's the part nobody wanted to talk about at first. Side leagues and business ventures. In the middle of all of this, several high-profile players and union leaders are tied to alternative projects like Unrivaled and other ventures, sometimes referred to as Project B. These ideas promise new formats, new schedules, new ways to monetize women's basketball outside the traditional WNBA structure. On paper, that sounds exciting. More opportunities, more money, more platforms for players. In a sport where off-season overseas play has been the only way to truly cash in for years, having more domestic options is a big deal. But for owners, this looks like a massive red flag. How do you sit across from someone in a high-stakes negotiation about the future of your league when they're also building rival or parallel platforms that could compete for attention, sponsors, and fan dollars? Even if everyone has the best intentions, the conflict of interest is obvious. What's good for an alternative league or off-season project isn't always what's best for the WNBA itself. Sponsors have limited budgets. Networks have limited slots. Every new project slices the pie a little differently, and owners worry that they're being asked to fund one pie while players are quietly baking another. Critics argue that this dual role weakens the players' credibility when they say they just want what's best for the long-term health of the league. Supporters counter that if the WNBA had taken care of players properly from the beginning, there wouldn't be a need for side projects in the first place. In that view, these ventures aren't a threat. They're a survival strategy born out of years of limited earning power and capped opportunities. Both perspectives have some truth to them, and that's exactly why the issue is so sensitive and rarely addressed directly in official statements. Either way, the existence of these ventures gives ownership yet another reason not to bend easily. If they already suspect the union leadership is thinking beyond the WNBA, they're going to be less patient, not more. That makes the owner's decision to go quiet and let the clock tick down feel less like panic and more like a cold, calculated read of where the player's leverage really begins and ends. It's not just about what's on the table today. It's about who might be preparing for an entirely different table tomorrow. Caitlin Clark's compromise message. In the middle of all this chaos, one quote cut through the noise, and it didn't come from the union's top brass or from the commissioner. It came from Caitlin Clark. Speaking at USA basketball camp at Duke, Clark called this the biggest moment the WNBA has ever seen, and said players were going to fight for everything they deserve. But then she added two lines that hit differently, that they need to play basketball, and that there has to be compromise on both sides. Coming from someone whose name has become almost synonymous with the league's recent surge in attention, those words carry a different weight than a generic talking point. They sound less like a slogan, and more like a reality check tailored to both sides. Those words matter. "We need to play basketball" isn't just a generic statement. It's a direct reminder that no matter how big the numbers get, no matter how heated the negotiations become, none of the money, none of the hype, and none of the new fans mean anything if there's no actual product on the floor. Sponsors don't pay for press releases. Networks don't pay for announcements. They pay for games. They pay for moments. They pay for players actually playing, not debating in meeting rooms. Clark was basically saying, whatever happens at the table, do not lose sight of why everyone is here in the first place. Clark also admitted that she couldn't speak to every single number because the system is complicated, but she emphasized that there are things the players should not compromise on and other things where they probably can and should. That is a balanced, nuanced message. It's not a blind, give us everything demand. It's a call for strategy. She essentially urged both sides to pick their battles wisely, lock in protections and foundational wins, but stay flexible on details that don't define the entire future of the league. For someone still early in her pro career to speak, that way tells you how much she understands the stakes. Yet, when union leaders were later asked about compromise, they mostly repeated the same talking points, insisting they had already been compromising, already respectful, already realistic, and that it was the league refusing to meet them halfway. The issue is that we're compromising doesn't mean much if the core demands stay exactly the same. To outside observers, it can sound like a change in tone but not in substance, which is exactly what frustrates owners who feel like they've moved more on paper than the players have. And when someone like Caitlin Clark, who brought in huge ratings, new fans, and massive attention, starts talking openly about the need for both sides to bend, ignoring that message or brushing it aside sends a strong signal. It says the current leadership is locked into a strategy that might not match what some of the league's biggest new faces actually want. If a growing share of the fanbase and star players are quietly thinking like Clark, sticking to an all-or-nothing approach could backfire in ways that aren't obvious yet, but will be very clear if games don't start on time. Lockouts, strikes, and replacement players. So where does all this lead? Straight into some ugly possibilities. With the CBA expired and the league operating in a status quo phase, both sides now have serious weapons at their disposal. The players voted in December to authorize a strike, giving their executive committee the power to pull the trigger if they feel backed into a corner. A lockout, meanwhile, can be initiated by the owners at any time, shutting players out of team facilities, paychecks, and official league activities. These aren't empty threats. They are tools that have been used in other leagues many times, and everyone in the WNBA has seen how disruptive they can be. Here's the nightmare scenario. Owners decide that the current demands are simply a non-starter and move toward a lockout timetable. Instead of running a season with their usual stars, they consider the nuclear option, bringing in rookies, fringe players, or even replacement talent willing to cross the line and play. The short-term product might be worse, but the long-term message would be clear. No single group of players is bigger than the league itself. That strategy has been used in other sports to reset bargaining power, but it often leaves scars that last long after the dispute is technically resolved. For the union, that would be a disaster. Many current players are in their prime or nearing the end of their careers. Losing one season, maybe more, doesn't just mean missing checks. It means losing momentum, missing windows for legacy, and watching newer, younger players step into their spotlight. The entire brand they helped build could get reshaped without them. Once fans get used to new faces, old stars don't always get their full shine back, especially in a league that's still fighting for every bit of attention it can get. For the owners, it's a gamble too. Fans could react badly to a watered-down product. Networks might push back. Sponsors might not want to attach their name to a season full of drama and half-strength rosters. But if ownership believes the long-term financial survival of the league is at stake, they might decide it's better to rip off the bandage now than bleed slowly over the next decade. That's the cold logic of labor standoffs in sports. Sometimes both sides are willing to endure serious short-term pain if they think it will lock in the kind of system they want for the next generation. That's why the silence, the unread proposals, and the seen, no response DM feel so tense. Nobody is saying out loud that they're ready to burn it all down, but both sides are quietly building the matches. Every public quote, every internal vote, every leaked detail adds more fuel to a fire that everyone claims they don't want to start, but nobody seems ready to fully walk away from either. The victim card, the villain card, and the future. At this point, both sides are playing roles whether they like it or not. The players are leaning into the story that they're being disrespected, dismissed, and told they don't understand the business, even when they insist they do. The league, on the other hand, is leaning into the image of the responsible adult in the room, claiming it has to say no to unrealistic demands to protect the future. Neither side wants to be seen as the reason games are canceled, so both are trying to frame themselves as the reasonable party backed into a corner. The truth is uncomfortable. Both sides are right about something, and both sides are wrong about something. The players are correct that this is probably the biggest moment in WNBA history, that their value has never been higher, and that the old system wasn't built to handle this new level of interest. The owners are correct that promising too much money too fast, tied to revenue that might not grow as projected, could wreck the league's finances in ways that aren't easy to undo. The hard part is that both truths can exist at the same time, and acknowledging that doesn't make the numbers magically line up any better. The union's public posture has been proud, firm, and sometimes emotional. The league's response has been distant, technical, and increasingly quiet. Somewhere between those two approaches, there is a deal that could keep the WNBA on the floor, pay players more, and still keep the books from collapsing. But every day this drags on, every message left unread, and every quote that downplays compromise pushes both sides further into their corners. Once a narrative sets in, players as victims, owners as villains, or vice versa, it becomes harder for anyone to step back and say, let's meet in the middle. So here's the real question. When fans look back on this in 10 or 20 years, what will they remember? A bold stand that finally got women's basketball the respect it deserved? Or a power struggle that took the league off the court right when the world finally started paying attention? If you made it all the way to the end of this breakdown, you're part of the small group that actually pays attention to the mechanics, not just the headlines. Drop a comment with your prediction. Does the season start on time, in full, or does a lockout or strike blow everything up? Hit like if you want more long-form breakdowns that go past the surface, and subscribe so you're here for whatever the WNBA's next move is, because this story is far from over.